Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Ramesh Sepehrrad, who is the leading Iranian-American scholar, published author, cybersecurity executive, and human rights advocate. She is speaking today about the Free Iran Convention that's going to take place on Saturday, November 15th. This is a great event that's going to take place in Washington, D.C., the Hyatt Regency. And you're going to have Mike Pompeo there, General James Jones, former U.S. Marine Corps Commandant, the Right Honorable John Bercow, the former Speaker of the Parliament, the House of Commons. And I remember seeing the videos of John Bercow. He should be fun to hear there. And Ambassador Carlos Sands, who was the American ambassador to Denmark, plus many other people who are going to be speaking there, many other people who are going to be attending. It's a great event. And Dr. Sepehrrad, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us about it today.
It's wonderful to be with you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Well, there's a number of things that we can talk about. I would like to start with you, because I would like to allow people to know what your experience is here. Now, if you have the materials for this, and you can get them from the National Council of Resistance of Iran on their website, NCRIUS.com, I believe it is, right? .org. I never get that right. NCRIUS.org. You'll be able to see a little bit of Dr. Sepehrrad's background, but Dr. Sepehrrad, you're an Iranian expatriate, right? And you have experienced both the Shah's regime, you and your family have experienced both the Shah's regime and the current theocratic regime in Tehran. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with both and how it's formed you to be where you're at today.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think when it comes to understanding Iran, it's super important to keep the context in mind, which is the struggle for democracy over two different dictatorships, whether it was the Shah's regime before the 1979 revolution or the current regime of the mullah, the theocratic regime of the Ayatollahs. So I was very young under the Shah's regime, but my uncle was a political prisoner under the Shah. And I remember at a very young age, I would accompany my mother to go to various prison and my grandfather to go to various prison to really see if we could have visitations with my uncle, who was severely tortured by the Savak regime. And my uncle was cream of the crop. He was one of the top first cohort of engineering class from the Shiraz University, who graduated from Shiraz Engineering University. But then, of course, among the 7 engineers who graduated, 5 of them ended up being political prisoners under the Shah, and they were all tortured. My uncle was a member of the Mujahideen Khalq, which was one of the opposition groups fighting against the Shah. And then later on, that opposition group became one of the main opposition groups fighting against the current regime of Tehran. So fast forward to post-revolution, of course, my uncle continued to be active for human rights, democracy, but he had to go underground within 2 years of the revolution because of the way the Ayatollahs were unleashing suppression. But my mother was also a political prisoner under this regime. So was my father and my younger sister, who was in prison as a teenager. She was a student activist. And then many other uncles and aunts also were arrested. So while the Shah's regime oppression continued and expanded and evolved under the mullahs, my family experienced the atrocities from 2 different dictatorships who had a lot of similar behaviors. They both had engine of oppression, which for one was the Savak and the other one was the Revolutionary Guards. They both resorted to execution, to torture. My family has lost several loved ones, including those who were massacred during the summer of 1988, when Khomeini issued a fatwa to massacre all of the MEK members and sympathizers. So my background really comes from a very informed sense of what took place and what is the real solution in hand. And more particularly, to be honest, Ed, there was a time in my life when I looked at my mother, my sister, my daughters, and I realized every single woman in my life who is near and dear to my heart has been touched by this current regime of Tehran or the previous regime of the Shah, one way or another. So as a woman, I cannot just sit back and not do anything. And that's why I'm doing everything that I can do these days.
Well, and Dr. Sepehrrad, you've been in the West now for 40 years, right? 1985, I think, is when you immigrated, when you were able
Most of my life,
to
yes.
yes. Um, but those early years, extremely obviously formative. I want to talk a little bit about women in Iran under both regimes, because I think what a lot of us forget in the United States, especially maybe the United States, was that the fact that there was pretty severe repression before Khomeini and the mullahs came into power, and that they were actually, as is usually the case in these types of revolutions, they were initially very warmly received, right? This was going to be a liberation, and women especially were pouring out into the street, and or at least at the time seemed to be part of that. And then it didn't take long, I would say, for the disillusionment to kick in. But initially, one of the one of the reactions was a liberation from the previous regime's oppression, which is part of the reason why I think one of the things that I think we tend to forget about in the West was that the Iranians unfortunately went from bad to worse, not from good to bad, but from bad to worse.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very descriptive. You're absolutely right, and I think no sector of the society more than women have experienced the atrocities, both under the Shah and under the Khomeini's regime and the
Right,
mullahs regime, in a different way. I think what I would say is under the Shah, he tried to, in a cosmetic way, westernize Iran without really recognizing the rights of women really stands on the voice on the issue of choice, where the choice is women's. Women didn't have their own choice and their own freedom to make certain decisions when it comes to their education, employment, and even their personal attire when they would go out in the streets under the Shah. But he did have some family law moderate, reforms that he tried to put in place as a way to westernize Iran. But under Khomeini, under the mullahs, the laws against women were much more institutionalized,
right,
and practices of stoning, and the way women were tortured because of the misogyny that was very much active, not only in the torture chambers, but also in the streets, and both in public and private sphere. The regime was trying to really control the lives of women. So I think it's very important for us to understand that itself did not silence women of Iran. In fact, it empowered women and immobilized women of Iran to fight even more fiercely against this current regime. If you look at the first 2 years of the revolution after the 79, you're absolutely right. Women had a very strong presence against the anti-Shah protests leading up to the revolution. But within the first 2 years, the mobilization and the activation of women's role within the society, within the political space, was extremely impressive due to the fact that we had organizations like the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, who is now a member, one of the primary members of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, who's hosting the convention that's coming up this Saturday. So I think as someone, as a historian, if I want to take a step back and think about the milestone of what was transformative when it comes to women's movement in Iran, I would say it was within that first 2 years that we had a political party, an opposition group that was very much active in the Iranian society and was really tapping into this role of women as an agent of change. And that's transpired in later years into emancipation and empowerment of women that really led to what we're dealing with today, which is the women's leadership in fighting against this regime. So I think someone who witnessed this personally, someone who has studied this over the years and have been researching this fact over the years, I am extremely hopeful, and I am extremely proud to see how Iranian women went from a very dire situation where they could have remained a victim to become survivors and now empowered leaders, and are actually forging a path to a democratic, secular, and a non-nuclear republic Iran.
Right. And again, we can talk about the nuclear or nuclear weapons development that's continuing to go on, or at least they're attempting to continue it even after the destruction of their facilities. Hopefully it's been set back by quite a bit. But honestly, the only real way to stop that is to change the regime, and because that regime is always going to be pursuing those types of weapons for its own purposes. We can talk a little bit about that if you like.
Yes, I think
Because
it's
I
important. Yes, I think it's important to understand why is the regime driving to get its hands on a nuclear weapon. We're dealing with a country that has access to a lot of natural resources. It really doesn't need to have nuclear weapons. But you're absolutely right. The miscalculation that we've seen in the Western policy is that this regime is just gaining or adding more tools to its toolbox. I think we need to pivot that, and we need to change that thinking and look at the Iranian regime is driving to get its hands on a nuclear weapons program because it's a means of survival for the supreme leader of Iran. And they are extremely delegitimized inside the regime, inside the country. This regime is extremely unwanted and rejected by the Iranian public. So the only way they want to be remain in power is through either oppression or nuclear weapons program. And I think that's why it's important when we think about Iran's liberation movement, when we think about a movement for a free Iran, we have to think about a non-nuclear secular republic Iran, where the Iranian people are rejecting this regime, they're rejecting its policy, they're rejecting its nuclear drive, and they want a democratic country. And based on that, when you look at the 10-point plan that is presented by Ms. Mariam Rajavi, the leader of the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, one of the key elements of her 10-point plan for a future Iran is a non-nuclear, secular republic Iran, meaning that we want to have a separation of church and state. We want to have a peaceful coexistence with our neighbors, and a non-nuclear Iran where Iran's resources can be actually used in support of the Iranian people, and a republic where people can choose their own representation, not a dictatorship or a monarchy that has been tried before. So I think it's important to look at the issue of Iran in a holistic way, and not from a singular point of women's movement or a non-nuclear movement. Is much more comprehensive than that.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a couple of questions and a couple of points that are going to be brought up at the convention on Saturday. First off, and you mentioned this to me just before we started doing the interview, the question is, why now? What's happening now? And the very first panel that you're going to have at this convention is that society is ripe for change in Iran, and that change is inevitable. Now, it's been 46 years of this theocratic regime being in control of Iran. We know that it's not popular, right? We've seen the street protests, but these have been going on for really most of the time. You know, they erupt and then they go away. They erupt and they go away. What's changed? What's changed about now? What is it about now that makes the time ripe for replacing this regime?
Yeah, I think we need to look at the current situation of the Iranian regime. This regime is at a breaking point, is at its weakest point. As I said, people are rejecting the regime at every level. The entire nation is demanding a new republic. So I think the timeliness of this convention is about turning decades of sacrifice into a democratic future. And the message of this convention is quite clear, that the Iranian people have the will, they have the alternative, they have the roadmap, and now the moment for the world is to stand with them. I think the timeliness of this convention is to really bringing the rest of the world to understanding that Iranian people want an Iranian regime change. And the regime change that we're talking about is not about putting American troops on the ground, is not about missiles coming from another country to kill Iran's leaders, is about really recognizing the Iranian people's right to overthrow this regime, recognizing the resistance movements. Iran's alternative has a very robust network of resistance units inside Iran. When you see all of the nationwide uprisings, what's really striking about these uprisings is the orchestration and the slogan and the messages that's coming from inside, across different cities. And it's a very unified message that's coming from inside Iran. And I think that should tell you how strong this network of resistance units inside Iran are connected and coordinated. And it tells you that when the time is ripe and the moment is there, they are going to bring this regime down. Then the question becomes, is the world ready for that? Is the world ready for a free Iran that stands for a non-nuclear secular republic? And I think that's what the message of the convention is going to be about.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Sepehrrad. There's reports over the last few days that Iran is going into a potable water crisis, right? We've seen reports that they might have to evacuate Tehran because they don't have enough water. Now, this is not a desert country, right? I mean, certainly there's arid areas of Iran, but it's not primarily a desert country. This isn't Saudi Arabia, for instance, right?
Yes.
What is first off, what's the reason for this water shortage, apparently at crisis levels? Number two, what could that be a catalyst for? Because I honestly think that if you're having to evacuate Tehran, which is their power base, that's almost a desperation move. And that means that something's extremely serious here in this water crisis.
Yeah, I think just as any other issue inside Iran, the core cause of the crisis that Iran is facing right now, especially in Tehran on the issue of water, is a mafia-style governance, this massive corruption and mismanagement by the Revolutionary Guards that has led us to this point. You're absolutely right. Iran is a country that has tremendous natural resources. Iran is a country that has tremendous talent. If you look at the Iranian diaspora, they are very successful. But this regime is just extremely brutal, and their crimes against the people of Iran is not just happening within the prison on the political, social, and economic level. It's also happening at the environmental and just the sheer existence of people because of the fact that their mafia-style governance and their corruption and mismanagement. Example of that is what we see inside Tehran right now, the issue of the water shortage. So I think the core issue is, how do we get the country back on the right track? Why does this regime have to arrest environmentalists inside Iran when they're calling and when they're alerting the society that we have to look for new ways of addressing the water shortage and the crisis that is looming? But yet, instead of listening to them, they arrest those environmental activists. The real reason is this regime is an anti-Iranian, I think, real brutal, criminal regime. And this is yet another example of their behavior. Now, coming back to your question of what this could mean for the Iranian society. So if you go back since 2017, Iran has had massive nationwide uprising over and over again. And some of it was over the price of egg that started in the city of Mashhad and it became a nationwide uprising. The other one was over the price of gasoline and ration for gasoline that also led to a nationwide uprising. And then the last one that we saw was over the killing of the young innocent Kurdish girl inside Tehran. So when you put all of these examples together, could this be another catalyst? could very much potentially be another catalyst, because the Iranian society is so explosive and it just needs that trigger. And I think the readiness of Iran's resistance units inside Iran and their defiance against this regime is what really is impressive, as we see the evolution of various uprisings, that no one except this regime knows better that when the next, and they have confessed to this, when the next uprising comes, it's going to be the end of them. So I think
Yeah.
in the next month or so, Iran is going to be a country to watch.
So I want to get back to what you're talking about in terms of mafia governance, right? First off, this is a feature of totalitarian regimes, no matter what the structure of it is, right? The Soviets had the same problem. They promoted people based on ideology rather than based on competence, right? And this is a feature in every single totalitarian government, regardless of what the flavor of totalitarianism is. But in this particular case, I think I'm curious to know what your answer to this question will be. How much of Iran is actually run by the mullahs themselves right now, including Khamenei? And how much of it is just IRGC Incorporated, just the whole Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as an almost all-encompassing entity within Iran? I mean, they're not just military; they're also commercial. There's all sorts of different tentacles that the IRGC now has in there, and I'm wondering how much of that is just basically the regime and the mullahs are sort of riding on top of that. Is that how you see it, or is it more subtle than that?
So I think when it comes to really such measurements, obviously Iran is not a free country where we could measure and survey people and poll
True.
people to understand
Yes.
the popularity of the regime or the popularity of those who want this regime gone. But I think the real indicator is two things. I think the real indicator is if you look at the last election that took place in Iran, as despite the regime's effort to really provide all kinds of incentive for people to come to and really demonstrate that we still have very vibrant elections, it was significantly boycotted by the public, to the point that the regime was even confessing that less than 20% of the people were actually participated in the elections. So there's that factor. And then the other factor is you really need to understand how much this regime is hated when you look at the resistance of the political prisoners, the continuous of the movement against the regime. And that has really gone across multi-generation, because this is a regime that people have been fighting for the past 46 years. But to the point around the mafia-style IRGC, or even the inner circle of the supreme leader, that inner circle is not only shrinking, but inherently it's so paranoid that it can't even trust, the left hand can't even trust the right hand. So there,
Right.
you've got that dynamics going on. But the economy and the entire I guess import, export, and really having control over the flow of the money, yes, that is in fact in the hands of the foundations that is led by the Supreme Leader's office, as well as the IRGC. That's where we believe that, and the Iranian believe also, that the sanctions are the most effective tools to limit this regime's power. And the enforcement of those sanctions are the easiest way that the international community can actually provide the support that the Iranian people need. So I think if one of the slogans that comes from inside Iran, and because Iranian regime obviously is trying to make it sound like, oh yeah, we can bring medicine in. Medicine is not being sanctioned in Iran. That's a lie to begin with. But then it is the fault of the United States. But then the next day you see the people going into the streets shouting, our enemy is here. Don't lie and say it's US. So if you look at the narratives, if you look at the slogans from inside Iran, you can tell how this this regime is being completely delegitimized, and Iranian people continue to risk their lives to expose this regime. And for example, another very impressive slogan inside Iran is that down with the IRGC, down with the paramilitary. And especially if you remember, after the killing of the Qasem Soleimani, they tried to make him a national hero, and they tried to make him, oh my God, a victim of this attack by the United States. But you didn't see that reaction in the streets of Iran. People were celebrating that Soleimani was eliminated. So I think the message, the true message of the Iranian people, it's coming from the street slogan, it's coming from its opposition, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, it's coming from Iran's prison cells, and of course the IRGC and the inner circle of the supreme leader is trying very, very hard to shift the narrative. But again, we're dealing with a criminal regime, we're dealing with a mafia-style regime, and as you said, just like any other totalitarian regime, they try to change the narrative, but the reality is different, which is a regime change is about to happen in Iran, and this regime will end soon.
Well, let's hope. I want to ask you one more topic, then we're going to talk a little bit just quickly about the convention and how people can participate in it. But Dr. Sepehrrad, I want to ask you, what does the end game look like here? When the regime collapses, how does that start? What happens during that collapse? And what can the United States and other Western powers do to ensure that when this thing collapses, that a secular republic, based on democratic principles, replaces it? We've not had great success in these missions. I mean, you can even go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that didn't actually. We thought we'd succeeded. It turned out that we didn't. What do we learn from that? How does this regime fall?
So I think how this regime falls is going to be defined by the people of Iran. It's going to be defined in the streets of Iran, and it's going to be defined by the network of the resistance units of Iran. I think the next question could potentially be how bloody it's going to be. And I think that is a question for the Iranian regime, because it is not the resistance units and is not the Iran's opposition that wants to have violent overthrow. It is the Iranian regime that wants to have a violent exit. So I think just like any other revolution, it's going to happen in its own due course and its own time. But the guarantee and the transition of this regime to a non-nuclear secular republic Iran can be seen in the credibility and the records of Iran's alternative, which is the National Council of Resistance of Iran. This is an alternative that is being supported by the majority of US Congress from both parties. This is an alternative that's been recognized by more than 4,000 parliamentarian members across the world. This is an alternative that has a proven record, who exposed Iran's nuclear program so that it can forge a peaceful solution to a threat of this regime. This is an alternative that has strong support among the Iranian people because of the number of people that have sacrificed their lives for the cause and the goals of this alternative. And this is an alternative that is significantly supported by the diaspora. You don't see anyone else. Of course, there are fake alternatives out there. We're not going to deny that. But I think the credibility and the records of the National Council of Resistance of Iran stands above anyone that claims to be an alternative to this regime, and they have the capacity, the organizational talent, and the structure and the leadership to ensure that Iran would land in a non-nuclear secular republic Iran. Within the NCRI program, within 6 months after the fall of this regime, there's going to be an election where people can elect their own representatives who then come in and draft a new constitution for Iran. No one else has this vetted plan that the Iranian resistance, the National Council of Resistance of Iran has. And I think that's why this convention is timely. Anyone who's interested to understand how a democratic Iran is going to come about is invited to come and attend this convention on Saturday, November 15th. They can register for this convention by visiting ncrius.org, because This is the time for the international community, for American people to understand. We're not talking about the regime change style like the way we had it in Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere. This is a regime change by the Iranian people. This is a regime change that doesn't require taxpayers' money. And this is a regime change by Iranians who do not want American soldiers on the ground. This is a fight that belongs to the Iranian people. But when it happens, what they want is the world's support and recognize their rights to overthrow this regime.
Well, you promoted it better than I did, but I'll promote it one more time. You can go to NCRIUS.org and you can sign up. They've got the link there for the Free Iran Convention 2025. If you are a journalist who happens to be watching this, you can sign up as you can get accredited as a journalist. You can be there as a journalist. This is all day, 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Hyatt Regency on Capitol Hill. This is the first Free Iran convention that they've held, and I think that it's very timely considering everything that's going on, as Dr. Ramesh Sepehrrad has just explained to us. And Dr. Sepehrrad, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I look forward to talking to you again sometime in the near future, hopefully when hopefully not we don't wait until the regime is gone, but hopefully the regime is gone soon and we'll get a chance to talk about that as well.
I look forward to that. Thank you, Ed.